Good afternoon. First of all, thanks very much to the Good Shepherd organisation and to Tanya and David for inviting me to speak today. I'm sorry that I can't be there in person, but circumstances dictate I need to be here in the UK. I hope what I've got to say, however, is of some use to you. I want to do three things today. First of all, I want to introduce the ESRC funded welfare conditionality project that I lead in the UK. Secondly, I want to say a little bit about how we define welfare conditionality. And thirdly, I want to move on to discuss with you some of the impacts of welfare conditionality in relation to lone parents, families, children, etc. Moving on to slide 2. Welfare conditionality, sanction support and behaviour change is a 5-year project funded by the ESRC. It involves 6 universities and is an independent academic project, so we're not funded by government or any other organisation. We're considering welfare conditionality, the linking of social security benefits to certain behaviours and conditions. Effectively, we're interested in 2 key questions. We're interested in the ethics and the efficacy of welfare conditionality. And as you can see, we're involved in fieldwork with 3 sets of respondents. We've done interviews with policy stakeholders. We've also done a range of focus groups with people who implement policy. But central to the project is a large, repeat, qualitative, longitudinal panel study with a diverse group of individuals who are subject to welfare conditionality in their lives. This includes people like unemployed people, disabled people, social tenants, lone parents, migrants, etc. The key thing that we're trying to achieve with this is to give a grounded view of the impacts and effects of welfare conditionality on people's lives. Does it take people closer to the paid labour market? Does it stop irresponsible behaviour? Now you can see on the bottom of the slide the numbers of lone parents that we've interviewed in waves A, B and C. Additionally, a number of lone parents were interviewed and sampled under different categories as well. Moving on to slide 3. What's this welfare conditionality thing? Well, if you look at the definition on the top of the slide given by Alan Deacon, I think that sums it up nicely. Certainly, welfare conditionality is about combinations of sanction and support, of sticks and carrots, punishments and incentives perhaps to help cajole, compel, encourage, depending on your point of view, welfare recipients into paid work. Now, some people will argue that the sanctions that are inherent with welfare conditionality are hugely problematic and cannot be overcome. Others will say that there is some space for coercive welfare, perhaps to lead people to a better place in their lives. Conditionality within the UK social benefit system is linked to the receipt of benefits being linked to state-specified behaviours. And indeed, as I'll say a little more later on, this has been intensified in recent decades. That quote there from the DWP 2008 sums it up nicely. Conditionality embodies the principle that aspects of state support, usually financial or practical, are dependent on citizens meeting certain conditions which are invariably behavioural. So it's about changing people's behaviour. It's about encouraging marginalised groups into paid employment. That's what the advocates would say. Adversaries would argue that more importantly, what welfare conditionality can do is drive people away from collective welfare. It can have negative impacts on people. And certainly the negative impacts have been a big part of our study to date. Moving on to slide 4. The purpose of this overcrowded slide is essentially to show you that welfare conditionality is now an embedded part of the UK welfare system. In my previous work, I've argued that whereas once welfare conditionality crept into policy, it is now a ubiquitous part of the UK welfare state. Time dictates I can't go into detail about these initiatives that are set out on this overcrowded slide. However, the key things that you need to take away from this slide are 3. First of all, welfare conditionality has been intensified. From 2010, a new sanctions regime was introduced. Essentially, for a low-level offence, such as being 5 minutes late for an interview at a job centre, you will be sanctioned you can be sanctioned and lose up to 100% of your benefit for 4 weeks. For a third high-level repeat offence, such as refusal to take a job, you can be sanctioned indefinitely until compliance. Welfare conditionality is also extended across many groups within the UK. So for example, whereas initially it was only applied to job seekers allowance claimants, what we've got now is an extension whereby disabled people under employment and support allowance rules are now expected to search for work if they're in what's called the RAG group. Lone parents are not exempt from this either. Gradually, the age at which lone parents have got to engage in work-focused interviews or seek work for up to 35 hours a week has come down, so that parents of very young children now have to be actively seeking work. Finally, welfare conditionality has been personalised, with job coaches able to set out variable requirements for individuals to attend job centres, work-focused interviews, specified training, or engage in up to 35 hours a week job search. So in effect, searching for a job becomes a full-time job in itself. Okay then, what do we know about how welfare conditionality works in relation to parents and children? I want to make some general points in relation to sanctions. And you can see that on this slide here, the first two pieces of data are interesting. One of the things we've found is that innocent third parties are often subject to the penalties that sanctions bring with them. So there we've got a migrant in Scotland who was sanctioned, who kept his child off school for several weeks. And underneath that, we've got some data there that illustrates a lone parent, a mother who couldn't feed herself because of a sanction and was giving the food to her children. Moving on to support, the support from job centres and work programme providers is at best variable. As the first piece of data on that slide emphasises, you're very much left on your own to search for work. Many of our respondents have argued that the job centre's main role is now policing the benefit claim rather than enabling people and helping people search for work. There are some good examples, as the final piece of data on this slide shows, but it very much depends on which individual you are sat down in front of and whether or not they appreciate your situation. There are what's called easements within the system in relation, say, to lone parents, whereby they should not be expected to work around school hours. But often these easements are not put into place appropriately because either they do not get discussed or because they can be ignored. Okay, moving on to this central idea that welfare conditionality can enable people into work. It's an interesting one, this, because it does enable some people into work, but often at a price. But let's start with the first quote on this slide 6. What this illustrates is that welfare conditionality can be counterproductive. Effectively, this lone parent is saying once he was sanctioned, once he was hassled, he couldn't be bothered anymore. So rather than enhancing his search for work, he simply was defeated by the system and tried to walk away from it. Now, the extended data that's underneath on slide 6, I think is important. Because, as I said a moment ago, welfare conditionality can move some lone parents back into paid work, but often at a high price. This was a woman that I interviewed, and on the first occasion I met her, she was working in a family business, she was doing 16 hours a week, she was quite happy with life, 4 children, lone parent, managing quite nicely. Now, the second time I interviewed her, she'd lost a job because of circumstances beyond her control. This meant that for the first time in many years, she had to engage with the job centre and claim job seekers allowance. And this was an activity and a situation that caused her great grief. Essentially, she became depressed. She had to rely on a mother who herself was sick to look after the children. And she took a job on a flexible contract various hours that didn't fit with her informal caring responsibilities. The reason she did this was because she was sick of, as she says on the slide, being degraded by the job seekers allowance system. So effectively, in order to avoid the job centre, which she said anything was better than that, she's taken a job which has done herself harm, has done her children harm, and she's moved into work. Now, for some people, this is a positive outcome. She's moved off welfare, she's moved into work. Whereas previously she was working 16 hours on this flexible contract, however, she's working sometimes only 4 hours a week. But she does not want to go back to the job centre, so she's sticking with it until she can find some better employment. I'll leave you to decide whether this is a positive outcome. But effectively, it's a good example of how welfare conditionality can force people into work that perhaps is not in their best interest and not in their children's best interest. Okay, final slide now, and this is a bit of an advert. There is plenty more that I could have said, but as time is tight, I'm going to move on and tell you about a conference that we're running in York, in England, in June 2018. You'd be very welcome to come to this conference. It's advertised on our website, www.welfareconditionality.ac.uk. If you want to contact me after this video, that's fine. My email's on there. It'd be very nice to see you at the conference next year. I hope this has been of some use to you. And if you haven't turned me off yet, thanks very much and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.